Hello, everyone. We are at Chapter 4 in your Serve Safe Manager book. Join me on page 4.2. And today we are going to do a little quick overview and then go into depth of each of the 9 stages of the flow of food. Does anyone want to share the first step? Exactly. It is purchasing, right? So after you have identified the menu that you want to serve, your best recipe, right? We are going to look for reputable vendors to purchase from, not the Joe Schmo that may pull up at the back of the loading dock and trying to sell you something because he's in the gig economy. We want to make sure that these are businesses that have reputations. They are on file with your local or state registered as a business. You can also check in recall audits from the USDA to make sure that they don't have any recalls or violations from good manufacturing practices. So do a little in depth. A lot of times we do have in established operations, established vendors, but new things come around, and it's always good to look around at other places to get unique or new food items or even better pricing. So make sure that you are purchasing from a reputable vendor. The next thing that we would want to do after that is to receive, right? So we purchased, and then here it comes. Receiving is a very important part of the flow of food. Why? Exactly. Because if that food item comes to us in a way that questions the quality or the safety of that food item, we want to have somebody trained. It's always good to have multiple people trained in receiving and schedule your deliveries at a time that your operation has a slower pace in order to be able to receive, inspect, resend back if needed, and then store quickly, right? So storage is our next part of the flow. We want to make sure that our storage areas are clean, organized, up off the floors, ventilation around, and we'll go around that. But quickly, because why? Exactly, time temperature control. If a frozen or cooled food item comes in, we want to make sure, because it's on the clock, right? That clock that we want to be keeping a kind of a general eye on through the entire flow of food. That clock is ticking anytime what we come out of that time temperature zone, which is what? Exactly, 40 to 135. Now, if you may remember, if there's any oldies in the crowd, 40 to 140, 40 to 140. That was always the verbiage of the danger zone. But with science, we have realized that it is best to bring that down to 135. So the danger zone is 40 to 135. So the next flow is we're going to put it in storage and then we are going to prepare. And in that preparation and flow of food is a very critical step, as you have already learned in your previous chapters, that our hands are the coolest and they're also dangerous because we touch our bodily parts, we touch surfaces, we touch food that customers may be ready to eat or that are going to be eating through our preparation process. So our hands are very important, and so is our personal hygiene and our practices in that prep area. The next is cooking. Our back of the house is experts at that. But through that cooking process, there is a steps that we make sure in that time temperature control, so TCS, or if you want to say TTCS, that is critical. And cooking is one of the critical stop points to stop bacteria and pathogens and viruses from surviving. And so, not all will learn, not all can be killed with cooking, but majority. And that's why it's super important to have the right tools and the right knowledge of what temperatures each food item needs to be before we can serve it is an important step in the flow of food. The next is the holding. So if you are front of the house and you are holding food to serve either as a buffet line or a prep line that you are serving from, the holding temperature is very important because why? We want to make sure that we are keeping it out of that danger zone and especially out of what we call a critical zone. Does anybody know what that critical zone is? Exactly. It is when the pathogens really flourish, right? So 70 to 125. And everybody loves a nice, beautiful 70-degree day, and so do pathogens. So that critical zone of 70 to 125 is really where you need to make sure you are passing through that quickly. And as we go through the chapters, we will discuss how long, in some of our serving situations, how long a food item can be in that zone until it's not safe anymore. And we'll discuss that. So that is called the critical zone, 70 to 125. And then around that is the danger zone, 40 to 135. So after we're holding, we would maybe want to cool some foods down. So if we're not going to use all the food at that time, it is best that back of the house cools it. And we'll go over, there are very handful of steps in safe cooling that we'll want to make sure that we highlight for your safe practices and knowledge. The next is if we need to utilize food up, which we like to do for a budget, we are going to reheat. And there are very good steps in reheating that we want to make sure that we pass through that critical zone fast and get it to a temperature that we know that maybe if anything started to bubble, toils and troubles through any of our process, that when we reheat, that we then get it to a temperature that we assure that we have killed the bacteria that can be killed. And then the last step, right? Who doesn't love serving? We are caregivers in the care of food and serving. And again, the hands are the coolest. In the serving practices, we'll go deeper into how we plate up, how do we serve, what are we looking for to use on the table that are safe or safer, and then how do we clean and scrape and take away from the serving in a safe manner for our guests. So join me then over to page 44 and let's talk to our neighbors. Let's get some share time. Share with each other maybe one time temperature control prevention action item that you are fond of, so to speak, in the 9 steps of the flow of food. So go ahead, talk to each other, find out where you're from if you haven't already, what operations you are, and exchange one or two, and then we'll share. All right, very good. Let's hear some examples. So, proper working tools. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Right. And let's talk. Yep, we're going to go into that. So let's talk about, we're talking about your thermometers, whether it be a probe thermometer or what you're monitoring in your coolers and your dry storage. If the things aren't working right, all right, how many times you call maintenance to check in on your coolers. I know for my operations, that was a constant. And oh, the dreaded where you have to um, clean out a refrigerator or freezer because it went down, and the fun that is, right? Let's hear it one more. Yes, yes, monitoring. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Right. So monitoring is checking, right? So that morning check of the refrigerator, that evening check of the refrigerator. I've been in operations where we actually go one more step because of all the reasons things can happen throughout the day, but especially in high prep times, that we are monitoring even more than twice a day. We check the temperatures even midday when it's real busy. So great. Thank you for that. We'll turn to page 411 and let's talk a little deeper about that tool, right? Let's go all over. You can take actually on 4.8. So stop right there. What we're talking about is discussing the thermometer types, right? So there are different types of thermometers for different things, right? So we have the refrigerator thermometers that we either have maybe an outside one. It's always good to put an extra one in there, especially where do you want to put the extra one? Right. Towards the front, because that's where temperature fluctuations are going to happen more often. And then also, what would be a good step about that? And we'll go into deeper, right? Putting more sensitive food items back, and those maybe like fruits and vegetables closer to the front. Great, great suggestion there. So there are different types of probes, and you can see that on page 4.8 in the table 4.3. And there are different probes, different strokes for different folks, right? So there's different probes for different food items, and getting to understand when you use these different probes. So like a bimetallic stemmed is an insertion, right? An infrared laser is great for you don't want to immerse into something. You just want to do a topical temperature, like say on the griddle that you don't want to touch. There's also, right, what can you use for like, so we're talking about the flow of food here. How do we know that something from our approved vendor has been in temperature control on their hands, on their side? Right? That's that time temperature indicator. That's a really cool thing. I always thought when I learned about that back in the day, I was like, wow, this thing is really neat that it can just show through this little sensitive um, paper thing that it can show a temperature for it. Very good. All right. What else? What other types of uh, air probes? Right. So going into a walk-in and right, you can't really double check with that. You can do an air probe there. Usually in dry storage, we use things like that. How about what else? Probes that can immerse. Very good. So the key here is using the right tools. And the biggest tool that we have in our wheelhouse is the thermometer. So making sure that we utilize the thermometer for the right food item or the right zone to be able to check those temperatures so that we're staying out of the TTCS, right? So what else are we missing from here? So if we are going to go ahead and utilize a thermometer, how do we know that it is actually telling us or doing what it's supposed to do, right? And the classic is what? How do we check our thermometers? So we can check it by, right, bringing another thermometer in. And we can also check it by the classic, right? What do you guys do with your just standard probe thermometers? You put it in an ice bath and it should come down to what temperature? 32 degrees, exactly. So making sure that you check the checks, right? You check the thermometer to the accuracy of it. Because what happens? Who doesn't drop a thermometer um, to, lose it? It's babbled around maybe somewhere. So having multiple ones and then also checking them to against accuracy either through the ice bath method or against another thermometer to make sure that it is accurate or through some can't be, so you just might have to throw them out and send them back to the manufacturer because that's exactly how we can verify because some of them can't be recalibrated. And we all know how to calibrate. You get your little wrench out, right? So when we do that ice bath with our traditional thermometer, that we then zone it down to that 32 degrees. And then the last is if you're going to be putting a thermometer into a food item, what do you think should happen with that? Exactly. We should be sanitizing those. all the time. So our little alcohol wipe preps, having them always available is a great way to have that in order to keep your tools clean and sanitized. All right, well, join me in the next section.